Hello and welcome to another Shadowshaper Duels video. Today's video is going to be something a little bit different than usual. I am not going to be showing off a build or a particular card, nor is there going to be any gameplay of any duels. This is just going to be a discussion video regarding the coin flip and the pros and cons of being the offensive or defensive player. And I will also be sharing something that I have only just realised, and I am curious to know if anyone else has also realised this. So yeah, please stick around until you find that out. And I would be interested to hear your own opinions on whether you prefer being the offensive or defensive player in the comments below. So to start off with, I have made a table of the pros and cons that I can think of with regards to being the offensive and defensive player. There may be some that I've not yet thought of, so if you can think of anything I have missed, then I would be curious to hear it in the comments below. So if you are the offensive player, the biggest pro in your favour is that you get to play your attacking cards first. And one example of that is you can play a Resilient Grenade Dreg on round 3, and if your opponent wants to do the same and play their Grenade Dreg on wave 3 as well, theirs will be attacked by yours for -2 health. So essentially, the same card being played by both people, but one of them takes damage and the other one doesn't. And obviously that goes for other attacking cards as well, not just the Grenade Dreg. That is just one example. A second example as well, which I'm starting to see quite a lot now, is people playing a Cabal Scion in a line on round 2, because the Cabal Scion only needs to be in a line of 2 units. So assuming you played a line unit on round 1, you can then play a Scion on round 2 and attack. And more than likely that will just kill whatever card your opponent may have played. To the point where if I'm now actually the defensive player and I see my opponent play a Cabal line card on round 1, I just immediately skip round 1 because I know whatever I play is pretty much going to get destroyed. So that's just another attacking card you can use to your advantage if you are the offensive player. And finally, the third pro is you may be able to do a move on round 6 which stops your opponent's strategy. For example, you might be able to kill enough of their cards to make the round 6 move less effective. So if they were going to run Vanuk, you might be able to kill some of their Fallen, or if they were using the Shade, you might be able to kill some of their Inspired Hive, or you just might be able to kill some of their Cabal line units, so that they don't even have enough in a line to play their round 6 card. And generally, I think in most cases, when I'm talking about, the being able to destroy their cards, it's probably with something like Ikora or maybe the Cabal tank, which gets to damage a lot of units. If you can play yours on round 6 first, it might just, ruin whatever plans your opponent has for their round 6. However, there are a couple of cons to going first and being the offensive player. But before I talk about them, let's talk about the pros of being the defensive player, because obviously some of the cons of the offensive player are just the inverse of being the pro of defensive. So one of the big pros I can think of with being the defensive player, and I remember using this a lot in the early game, was you can play cards that have a effect that lasts for 2 turns on your round 4, and they will still be active on your opponent's turn 6. So an example of that is either Ayuela, the Resilient Grenade Dreg, or the Elite Sniper Vandal. I remember specifically using this a lot with the Elite Sniper Vandal. If I was to play that card on round 4, then it will be active for my opponent's round 5 and 6. And specifically, the reason I'm mentioning round 6 is if their final move is a card that buffs their own units, for example, Vanok, although there is a Cabal card that does a similar effect, you will have a counter active to just immediately damage any of their cards that get buffed. But even if it's not the Sniper Vandal, an Ayuela and a Grenade Dreg in combination is a very good threat, because effectively whatever row your opponent plays something on, you are going to attack it. So you can play your cards like that on round 4, and they will be active for your opponent's round 5 and round 6. However, you might sometimes want to save them for round 5, especially if you think your opponent might have something that they can use to counter them. You might want to save them for round 5, and that way, when you do play them, your opponent doesn't really have a chance to counter them. And by that I mean, if your plan was to, so should I say your opponent's plan was to play something like a Vanok, if you play them on round 5, then they either have to play their Vanok anyway on round 6, or they have to play something to try and attack your cards, but then they can't play Vanok because it's already their last turn. Whereas if you do play them on round 4, you are giving your opponent the chance to counter them on round 5. So there is a risk with playing them on round 4, but certainly you have the option to play them on round 4 and have them active for the remaining 2 turns. Just sticking on this same topic, I'm going to jump now to the con of the offensive player. If you are the person going first and you want to do the same thing, you have to play any card that has a 2-turn effect on round 5 if you want it to be active for your opponent's round 6. Assuming you have a different move in mind for your own wave 6. So if you want to play something like a Vanok or an Ikora, but you also want to set up a Sniper Vandal to counter your opponent, you have to play that card on round 5, just so that it will still be active on your opponent's round 6. And even then, you are still giving your opponent the chance to counter that card on their own round 5. So, as an example, if you play a Sniper Vandal on round 5 going first, your opponent could still play something like a Wu Ming on their round 5 and then play whatever their final card was on round 6. So, generally speaking, being the defensive player, you are able to react better to your opponent's cards and try and counter them. Rather than, if you are the offensive player, you are generally, it's a more attacking position, but not necessarily in the best place to counter your opponent. So now just a few final cons that one more. There is one more pro of being the defensive player, which is that on round 6, you know what final score you have to beat. And that might allow you to strategize a little bit better in the time it gives you, and even do the maths of some of your attacking cards to make sure if your final move is going to win you the game or not. Because obviously going last, your opponent has already set the target, so you know what you have to try and do to win. So now just discuss a few of the cons that I haven't yet mentioned. A con of being the offensive player is if your opponent has an attack they can do on round 6, then their final attack could damage your round 6 card, whereas you never got the chance to attack theirs. An example of that is if you play an Ikora on round 6 as the offensive player and attack your opponent, when they play their, possibly play their own Ikora on round 6, then they'll be able to damage yours, whereas you never got the chance to damage theirs. So there can be an advantage in being the defensive player specifically for round 6, just to have that, effectively have the last say and do the final damage. Or, if you have cards like Wu Ming or Wolf, you might be able to use them to just, delete one of your opponent's high health cards if they played something with a lot of health, or, remove a large buff from a card if that was your opponent's final play. That's basically the pro I said earlier. Being the defensive player, you can react better. So that's a con of being the offensive player, that you show your final move first, and then your opponent has the chance to react to it on their round 6. However, one of the cons, and I think it's one of the cons of being the defensive player, is your final move on round 6 may be made less effective or even impossible, depending on what your opponent did on their own round 6. By example, if your final move was to play the Vanok card or summon a Shade or even make a Cabal line, well, you may have already had all of your fallen cards be killed, or your Inspired Hive, similar, be killed, so you don't have any to play. Or your Cabal line might have been damaged enough where there's not enough units in it to even allow you to play your card, play the effect that it needs. For example, the tank needs to be played in a 5-unit line. If your units have already been destroyed, you may not have enough units to make a 5-unit line. And then I think the final con I haven't yet mentioned, with being the defensive player, is it can be really difficult to play cards and not have them be immediately destroyed if your opponent is playing a very aggressive play style with attacking cards. Again, that's basically the opposite of the first pro I started with. If your opponent is constantly playing cards designed to attack you, then whatever you play might just get immediately destroyed on the next turn. Similar to what I said at the start with the Scion. Now, if your opponent is not being as aggressive and they are playing their own more passive play style, such as Hive with Inspired or Cabal Columns or even Fallen, then it's maybe not as noticeable, but it is certainly very noticeable when coming up against an attacking play style that you are at a big disadvantage going second. So those are the pros and cons I could think of, and some specific niche scenarios, such as with the Sniper Vandal or other specific cards. And this is maybe why you will hear me say sometimes about I think there is a big advantage to being the offensive player, again, for an attacking play style. But there is one other thing that I've only noticed today, which actually makes it even more of an advantage to be the offensive player. And that's what the question marks here represent. I didn't want to give a spoiler away. So there is one big advantage to being the offensive player, and by the reverse, it is a disadvantage to being the defensive player. This is a screenshot I have taken where, as you can see, I am the offensive player, and it is my turn 1. And I just want you to pay attention to how many cards I have on my bottom row. I currently have 6 cards on my bottom row. So the game starts you with 5, and then it immediately turns over the top card. So when I'm making my first move, I have 6 cards to choose from. However, this is a screenshot I have just taken where I am the defensive player, again on turn 1, and I only have 5 cards on my bottom row. And the game has already turned over my top card from the deck. So just by being the defensive player, I have 1 less card to choose from on my first turn. And if we now see that through to the end, this is another screenshot I have just taken where I'm once again the offensive player. This is round 6. And as you can see, I have played 2 Kavars during this game. If you're not aware, Kavar allows you to draw 2 more cards. And now, as you can see on my round 6, I have 0 cards left in my deck on the bottom right. So during this game, I have been able to access every card in my hand, which can be really important if your whole build revolves around having a specific exotic card that you need to make sure you draw. Obviously, I had to use 2 Kavars, but assuming I'd played them on my earlier rounds, round 4 and round 5, I could 100% guarantee that I find my exotic card by round 6. However, going back to being the defensive player, if you remember, I had 1 card less at the start. So with a similar screenshot here on round 6, I've once again played 2 Kavar cards. But despite that, you can see I still have 1 card left in my deck at the end, which means there is a chance that could be my exotic card. And actually, if you notice here, I don't have Ikora on my bottom line, whereas on the previous screenshot, I had both Ikora and Estella. So this was actually a scenario, like that, where I am missing my round 6 card if Ikora was the card I wanted to use as my final play. So just by being the defensive player, you have access to 1 less card at the very start of the game, and therefore you have access to, only 14 out of your total 15 cards in the deck, assuming you play 2 Kavars. But even if you don't play the 2 Kavars, which, they allowed me to draw 2 more cards each, if I had not played 2 Kavars, I would have 5 cards left in my deck at the end, whereas if I was the offensive player and hadn't played 2 Kavars, I would only have 4 cards left in my deck. So yeah, just by being the offensive player, you get access to one more card than the defensive player. So now coming back to this table, and I have filled in the pro and con that I just shown. I'm curious to know if anyone else had noticed this, that you get access to less cards as the defensive player. And I am curious to know whether this is an intended design or whether it is just maybe a bug that the wrong number of starting cards has been configured for both roles. Personally, I don't see any reason why the defensive player should start with less cards. I think at the very least, both players should start with the same amount of cards to make it fair. And I could even see an argument to be made where the defensive player should probably start with one more card than the offensive player, just to give them more opportunity to try and counter the offensive player. Whatever the offensive player plays on round one, you have more options to try and counter them by having access to one more card. But even then, I don't think it would be unfair to just have both players start with the same number of cards. But I certainly don't think it is fair that the defensive player starts with one less card than the offensive player. They are already at a disadvantage from an attacking standpoint by going second. So I don't think they should also be punished with one less card. So yeah, I guess very quick final closing thoughts on what my preference is. If I am running an attacking deck, for example, a Cabal line deck, I certainly have a preference for being the offensive player, and I find I have a much better success rate when I am the offensive player than the defensive player when using that deck. However, if I'm running a more passive deck, I'll be honest, I don't really mind, and actually, I probably have a slight preference towards being the defensive player, just because it allows me to counter my opponent more. And if I am running a more passive deck, such as the one you may have recently seen me using with Estella, I'm not really bothered about attacking my opponent, or even being attacked for that matter. So I quite like maybe going last, just so that I can work out, what my opponent's final score is, and then try to make sure I beat it. So yeah, that's my final closing thoughts. If I'm attacking, I definitely want to be offensive. If I'm running a more passive deck, it doesn't really matter. With maybe a slight preference towards being defensive. So yeah, thank you for watching, and yeah, please share your own preferences in the comments below, and let me know whether you had also noticed about the difference in starting cards between being offensive or defensive.